To the showdown in the Caribbean Sea, the U.S. Coast Guard is pursuing a third tanker off the Venezuelan coast. It's the third in the last 10 days. Tonight, Venezuela is pushing back, calling the seizures, quote, theft and hijacking. Here's ABC senior White House correspondent Selena Wang.
In the early hours of December 20th, 2025, the U.S. Coast Guard boards a Panama-flagged tanker named Seizures off Venezuela's coast, seizing it under sanctions. Just days later, on Meet the Press, officials discuss escalating pressure on Maduro. But beneath these headlines lies a timeline of U.S. concessions that allowed such evasions to flourish. Today, we uncover the overlooked connections that mainstream coverage left out. Let's begin with the story as it's been told. Over the past few days, major outlets like Reuters, ABC News, and the New York Times have reported on the U.S. Coast Guard's operations targeting Venezuelan oil tankers. On December 10th, the Coast Guard, with Navy support, seized the tanker skipper in international waters after it left Venezuela loaded with crude. Then, on December 20th, in a pre-dawn raid, they boarded and took control of the Seizures, a vessel accused of sanctions evasion. By December 21st, officials confirmed pursuit of a third tanker in the Caribbean, one flying a false flag and ignoring boarding requests. These actions stem from President Trump's December 17th announcement on Truth Social, declaring a total and complete blockade on sanctioned tankers linked to Venezuela. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem framed the seizures as a blow against Maduro's regime, emphasizing their role in disrupting funding for what the administration calls narco-terrorism. CBS News noted the Seizures was part of a dark fleet of vessels dodging trackers to export Venezuelan oil illegally. Coverage has highlighted the escalation. Trump's order gives the Coast Guard authority to enforce long-standing sanctions aggressively. AP News reported the third pursuit on December 22nd. Quoting a U.S. official who said the vessel is subject to a judicial seizure warrant. Meanwhile, on NBC's Meet the Press that same day, Senator Tim Kaine discussed the operations, linking them to broader U.S. strategy against Maduro. The narrative stays focused on enforcement seizures as a tool to isolate Venezuela economically, with little mention of why these tankers proliferated in the first place. But what if the full story involves U.S. policies that inadvertently enabled this shadow trade? Shifting gears, let's examine the primary sources that reveal a different layer. Our key focus is the full transcript and video of NBC's Meet the Press episode from December 22, 2025. Available on NBCnews.com, along with U.S. Treasury Department sanctions announcements from ac.treasury.gov. These are public records. I'll link them below for your review. Start with the interview. At the 6:29 timestamp in the Meet the Press segment, host Kristen Welker presses President Trump on the tanker pursuits, asking about the blockade's implementation. Trump responds by emphasizing the need to cut off Maduro's oil revenue, stating the seizures target vessels funding terrorism. Later, at 12:45, Senator Tim Kaine, a Democrat from Virginia, acknowledges the operations but warns of escalation risks, noting the Coast Guard's actions align with executive orders from March 2025, imposing 25% tariffs on countries importing Venezuelan oil. Kaine references the Seizures seizure, detailing how the vessel carried approximately 500,000 barrels of crude, valued at over $30 million based on current Brent prices. But here's the first revelation mainstream outlets glossed over. These seizures connect directly to past U.S. concessions that allowed Maduro's regime to build its evasion network. Treasury's December 10th announcement just before the skipper seizure sanctioned 6 additional tankers: White Crane, Kiara M. H. Constance, Latafa Tamia, and Monica Long, with their operating companies for transporting Venezuelan crude in recent months. Page 2 of the OFAC press release lists their involvement in shadow fleets, with specific IMO numbers like 9,273,052 for the White Crane. This builds on sanctions from earlier in 2025, but reports like those from Reuters stopped at the pursuits without linking back. Pause for a moment. Why does this matter? Because the Meet the Press discussion at the 1803 mark briefly touches on enforcement, but ignores how Biden-era licenses created loopholes. For instance, in October 2023, the Treasury issued General License 44, authorizing any company to transact in Venezuela's oil sector for 6 months. As detailed in the license document on Treasury.gov, this was in exchange for election promises that weren't met, leading to reimposition in April 2024. Yet, individual licenses persisted for firms like Chevron, allowing production to rise from 700,000 barrels per day in 2022 to 900,000 by early 2025, per OPEC secondary sources. Mainstream stories on the seizures mention none of this backstory, leaving out how these concessions fueled the very fleets now being chased. We'll connect more dots soon. To grasp the weight of this, we need historical grounding. U.S. involvement in Venezuela's oil dates back over a century, when dictator Juan Vicente Gómez granted concessions to American and British firms in the early 1900s. By the 1960s, US companies like Exxon and Shell dominated, creating expatriate communities and exporting up to 2 million barrels daily. But nationalizations under Hugo Chavez in the 2000s shifted control to PDVSA, Venezuela's state oil company, leading to U.S. sanctions starting in 2005 for asset seizures. Fast forward to 2017, the Trump administration tightened restrictions, banning PDVSA exports to the U.S. in 2019. Production plummeted from 3.5 million barrels per day to under 400,000 by 2020 per EIA data. The Biden era introduced flexibility in October 2023. General License 41 allowed Chevron to resume operations, pumping $4 billion in revenue for PDVSA by 2024, as noted in congressional reports like CRS IF 10715. This was tied to the Barbados Agreement for free elections. But when Maduro's court banned opposition leader Maria Corina Machado in January 2024, licenses like GL-43 for gold mining were revoked. Trump's 2025 actions reversed this. In February, he ended Chevron's cash payments to PDVSA, and March's executive order added 25% tariffs on indirect importers. Effective April 2nd, Treasury sanctioned Maduro's family and more vessels in December. This context shows the seizures aren't isolated enforcement. They're a response to years of policy swings that mainstream narratives simplified, omitting how concessions like GL-44 enabled shadow fleets to evade detection through false flags and transponders. Building from there, let's deepen the evidence. Returning to the sources, the Meet the Press transcript at 2217 has Trump linking the blockade to stopping stolen U.S. oil fields, echoing Stephen Miller's claims that Venezuela nationalized American assets. But cross-reference this with Wikipedia's history of U.S.-Venezuela oil relations and the Center on Global Energy Policy's May 2025 report on tariffs. These reveal patterns mainstream ignored. The second revelation: past U.S. deals not only allowed evasions, but profited intermediaries tied to Maduro. For example, under Biden's GL-41, Chevron's joint ventures produced 200,000 extra barrels daily by Q1 2025. But data from PDVSA internals leaked and reported by the New York Times shows a sanctioned businessman handled sales of Chevron's crude handed to the government. This trader linked to Maduro's family per Treasury sanctions from December 2025. Sold all output from Chevron's largest field since summer 2025. The Times article details transactions worth hundreds of millions, verifiable through shipping manifests on sites like Marine Traffic. Connect this to the seizures. The Skipper, seized December 10th, was part of this network, carrying crude possibly from licensed fields. As per Justice Department warrant unsealed December 12th on justice.gov. Page 3 citing IMO 9,273,052 ties. In the interview at 28 minutes and 45 seconds, Welker asks about risks. But no one mentions how Trump's March tariffs 25% On exports from countries like China buying, Venezuelan oil were evaded via shadow fleets until now. OpenSecrets.org donor data adds another layer. Oil firms like Chevron donated over $15 million to super PACs in 2024 cycles. Per FEC filings, influencing policy leniency. Think about it. Why the oversight? Mainstream simplified the timeline, closing the loop on current actions without showing how Biden's 2023 concessions, like lifting bans for 6 months, let production rebound and fleets grow. These connections drawn from public docs highlight ignored money trails, $913 million in defaulted debts leading to Citgo auctions, per court filings on Court Listener. This paints a fuller picture of policy hypocrisy that got lost in the chase narratives. What does this mean moving forward? The seizures could cripple Maduro's oil exports, which fund 95% of Venezuela's budget per World Bank estimates. With 3 tankers down and more pursued, revenue might drop by $1 billion annually if blockades hold, per Colombia's CGEP analysis. But questions arise. Will this spark migration surges, as Francisco Moro warned in The Atlantic, potentially adding to border strains? Or escalate tensions with China? A key buyer, Reuters notes U.S. actions linked to geopolitical rivalries, with shadow fleets routing 500,000 barrels monthly to Asia. Consider the risks. Trump's blockade, legal under executive orders, might provoke incidents at sea, as the third tanker's flight suggests. In Meet the Press at 34-12, Kane raises humanitarian concerns. But the revelation implies past concessions worsened the crisis. Biden's licenses indirectly bolstered Maduro, allowing evasion until Trump's reversal. This raises accountability issues. Did oil lobbies with $10 million in 2025 spending per lobbying disclosures sway leniency? Viewers should ponder if current enforcement addresses root causes or just symptoms. Broader implications touch democracy. The Barbados Agreement's failure, detailed in State Department reports, shows concessions tied to unfulfilled elections enabled regime survival. If seizures succeed, they might force negotiations. But without addressing money trails like Chevron's $4 billion windfall, they risk repeating cycles. These points, overlooked in mainstream, invite scrutiny of U.S. foreign policy consistency. Pulling back, this story exemplifies how energy geopolitics intersects with sanctions enforcement. Venezuela's oil, once a U.S. staple, now fuels global tensions. Trump's claims of stolen fields echo historical grievances from Gomez-era concessions to Chavez National. But as Al Jazeera notes, no legal U.S. claim exists post-expropriations. Yet policies swing with administrations. This ties to larger themes. Shadow economies thriving on policy gaps, with Maduro offering us firms dominance in October 2025 talks. Per the Times, only for rebuffs leading to blockades. It questions influence. Oil tariffs from March 2025 deterred but didn't stop evasions until seizures. In a divided world, such actions could realign trade, shifting Venezuelan crude from China back westward if pressure works. Ultimately, it's a reminder of how overlooked concessions shape today's headlines, urging us to trace money and timelines beyond surface reports. We've dissected the records. NBC's Meet the Press transcript from December 22, 2025, with timestamps like 6:29, Treasury's OFAC announcements, including the December 10th sanctions list, and historical docs like CRS if 10715 on Congress.gov. These uncover the concessions mainstream skipped. Dive into the links below to verify. If this raises more questions, share in the comments. We can explore together. Thanks for joining.